I'm joined now by Congressman Eric Swalwell. Thanks so much for joining me.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me back.
So, Congressman, there have been a couple of instances of threats against you, and we've now found out that Donald Trump's DOJ is not pursuing charges against the people who have threatened you. And at the same time, we've seen the DOJ take action against people who Trump views as his political enemies. And so, kind of in light of the fact that this is very much a weaponized DOJ, can I have your reaction to the fact that, they viewed the threats against you and just basically opted to ignore them?
What we've seen since Donald Trump has come into office is that he's emptying the jailhouse, the violent insurrectionists, by the well over 1,000
Yeah.
let free who are reoffending. He's let George Santos, who just went into prison for a 7-year term, he's let him out, and he's trying to fill it, with his political enemies, going after James Comey, going after Tish James. Clearly, Senator Schiff appears to be next. And then what most people probably don't know is that many of the president's political opponents receive a myriad of threats against their lives, against their staff, against their families every single day. And a couple weeks ago, after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the Attorney General had put out on her social media that the administration will aggressively pursue any threats against elected officials. And I responded essentially saying, look, that's not the case. We have a number of direct, specific threats to me and my kids that have not been prosecuted. And we were sent letters saying they would not be prosecuted. Now, to the Attorney General's credit, she reached out to me and asked to look at those cases. And I sent those cases over to her. I hope they are charged. I don't want to be treated any better or worse than anyone else. But my fear at this point is that because I have been a critic, because I am someone who holds the president accountable, is that the DOJ is simply not going after people who threaten me. And if that's the case, that just leaves that's an effort to deter individuals from speaking out against the president.
Well, to that point, I mean, the natural conclusion of that is if you have threats or actionable threats against any prominent Democrats, that the DOJ just decides to say, hey, we're not going to charge this, then doesn't that just send a message to people out there, people who we, by the way, know are have a proclivity to act on behalf of this president? We saw as much on January 6th. We've seen as much in numerous instances since and before that basically when it comes to crime against Democrats, that just becomes legal at the hands of this DOJ?
That's exactly right. And so what's happened is that individuals like the insurrectionists on January 6th, they know they can carry out violence in the name and at the request of the president, and then that he will do everything, to let them off, and to absolve them of any wrongdoing. And now it appears that they can also threaten, the president's political opponents and not be held accountable. One other piece of this that I've been working on is to make sure that we protect judges to the best of our ability, because anytime the president has a judge rule against him, and that's happening a lot right now, and it's happening also by Trump appointed judges, the president will attack the judges, or Stephen Miller or others will go after the judges, and the judges receive an escalation of death threats against them. The problem is that judicial security is in the hands of the executive branch, which is crazy, probably an unintended, consequence of setting up the country and not thinking through that you would have a president who would threaten the judicial branch, and then they would have to rely on the executive branch for their security. So I wrote legislation called the Marshals Act, which puts judicial security in the hands of judges, because we don't want creeping into their deliberations the fact that if they rule against the executive branch, that the executive branch is ultimately the one that protects them. That's essentially like, speaking out against a mobster when, the mobster is the one that, protects your store. That That's
Right.
just not going to happen. And that's the position that judges find themselves in right now.
Is there any discomfort from your Republican colleagues who staked so much of their identity prior to Trump 2.0 on this idea that Joe Biden had weaponized the government against the right, and now we have out and out weaponization that would make anything that has happened before this look like child's play? Is there any discomfort at all, or was all of that just an act? And now that they are seeing actual weaponization and it's at the hands of their own president, suddenly it's perfectly fine, and they have nothing to say about it.
Above ground, it's crickets. What I hear, though, in private conversations at the congressional gym, at the coffee line, at the Longworth cafeteria, what I hear is that they're afraid to cross the president. They're afraid for a couple reasons. One person told me that, when a big vote was approaching and this Republican was toying with the idea of voting against the president's legislation, he said that his spouse had said to him, "Don't be the tallest poppy in the field. Don't bring this on to our family," because the way it works is if you speak out against the president or if you vote against him, he goes on a tweet storm, and then his, army of supporters start sending threats to those individuals. That's the environment that the president has created. But the other calculation that they're making now is that if I'm on the president's team and then I speak out against him or I cross him, it's not just that death threats come out against me, it's that he may come after me criminally. And John Bolton is, example number one. He's the shining example of that the president, would weaponize the government against his own team if they spoke out. So that's the kind of volatile environment that we're in right now. And there's not a lot of courage on their side.
So on this idea that, for these Republicans, the biggest impediment to them being able to do what they want is Donald Trump. And by the way, that was the same thing with Disney, until we saw a mass uprising of people say that, okay, if you want to cancel Jimmy Kimmel, then we're going to cancel Disney and ABC. And they saw that in fact, Trump wasn't the biggest impediment to their success. We have the No Kings protest that just happened where 7 million people took to the streets. And I think one of the reasons, at least in my opinion, that was important is not just because it showed this administration kind of like dealt a blow to this administration's idea or optics that they have total control, because when you have 7 million people marching against you, that will obviously pierce that bubble. But it also has some impact on when you're thinking about the mandate that this president has, that this administration has, and then you have 7 million people march, suddenly that mandate doesn't seem so big and so total. I'm wondering if you think that as we continue to see more uprisings like this, as we look to the aftermath of No Kings, where so many people did take to the streets, whether that has any impact on these Republicans who prior to this may have viewed the only obstacle to their success as Donald Trump himself and not the American people.
I hope it does. Ted Cruz, if you listened to him earlier this week, I'm sorry if you had to listen to him, he acknowledged that No Kings is a real problem, for their party, recognizing what you just said, that any protest of that magnitude has to send a message, to the party in charge that, midterms are coming and that we're fired up. And it's not just, that we're moving with our feet toward the ballot box in the way that we're organizing, but also if you look at, the fundraising numbers on the Democratic side for the House and the Senate. Again, our side is very enthusiastically engaged to win the House and the Senate. Now, what I would watch, and for your viewers to watch, that will be, kind of the canary in the coal mine, is the November 4 election this year. And so there's 4 races that I'd put on your radar. Of course, in California, there's Prop 50. Right now, it's polling quite well for us. Can't take it for granted. Have to get our ballots in, but we match what Texas did with their rigged districting process there to get 5 seats here in California. But the other 3 to watch, there's the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, where there's 3 Democratic justices who are up for what's called retention. That's a big state. Trump won that state last November. Winning that state means that we have free and fair elections for the midterms and the presidential election in Pennsylvania. And then, of course, the Virginia and New Jersey governor's races. Brian, if we win all 4 of those in just 2 weeks from today, that is momentum. That's getting our confidence back. I believe in politics, just like sports, momentum begets momentum. And if you're on the other side, of that victory and you're a Republican, what you're looking at is that a big wave is coming. And so it either forces more retirements in some of the toss-up seats, which makes it easier for us to win those seats. And it also demoralizes the other side and their willingness and ability to volunteer, make contributions, and engage in the process. So those four elections are so important, and that's where I'm really devoting my time right now. And I do believe that, it's really the retirements that will tell the story. And Don Bacon retiring in Nebraska, that's a toss-up seat for us to win the House. Tom Tillis retiring in North Carolina, that's a toss-up seat for us to win the Senate. You're going to see more of those if we have a big night on November 4th.
As we look toward the prospect of winning the House, obviously a major obstacle on that front is the prospect of more states coming in and redrawing their maps mid-cycle. We've seen Republicans in North Carolina do so, Missouri. There is the prospect of Indiana, Ohio, Florida, and on and on and on. Do you think that Democratic governors, Democratic state legislatures are doing enough right now? And by the way, this comes at the hands of people who are saying the right thing, who are saying that, we need to meet this moment with not an ordinary response, but an extraordinary response to the power grab happening at the hands of Republicans. But so far, we've just seen Gavin Newsom and California Democrats move forward with this process, and nobody else has. And we're watching Republican state after Republican state after Republican state fall very easily to this administration who's demanding new maps. And so is enough being done on the left to counteract what's happening?
No, it's not enough is not being done because we have Democratic states that can redistrict to match what's happening, as you pointed out, in North Carolina, Missouri, Kansas, Ohio, Florida. They'll do it anywhere that they can, and they'll do it with no regard to the constitutional law around voting rights. And so we do have states that can do more. And
so these people know these people are not they aren't political. They're not political animals, right? They understand what's going on, and even understand it well enough to be able to say the right thing. So what is the thought process here? Why the hesitation in terms of actually putting their words into action?
I've heard in one state they're afraid of diluting some of the bigger margins that Democrats win by in their seats. And look, we sacrificed in California. Members went from really safe seats to not as safe seats because we understood the assignment, which was to match Texas. So we all have to be willing to sacrifice because the last thing, look, what do you want to wake up the morning after the midterms and Democrats are in the minority, but you still won your seat by, 68% rather than 62%? I mean, give me a break. Like we have to, recognize the existential nature of this midterm election.
Perfectly put. We'll leave it there. Congressman, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. See ya.